February 1944. 25,000 feet above northern France. The silver formation of B-17 flying fortresses drifts through the freezing blue void. Sunlight flashing off their wings, contrails carving white scars across the sky. In the last bomber, crouched inside a cramped metal shell at the tail, a young gunner wipes frost from his goggles. The glare of the rising sun blinds him every time he tries to aim. Below, German fighters climb fast, dark specks turning into lethal shapes. The gunner twists, tracking them, but the reflection burns his eyes. Then he tilts his head slightly, and the light disappears. A small mirror wedged just above his gun sight bends the glare away. Suddenly he can see everything, perfectly. Moments later, his twin .50 caliber guns roar. One fighter spirals down in smoke. The rest scatter. What started as a crazy mirror idea from a frustrated gunner will soon spread through entire bomber groups, transforming defensive accuracy and saving hundreds of lives in the skies over Europe. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe and tell us in the comments which country or city you're watching from. By early 1944, the air war over Europe had become a brutal contest of endurance. Every morning, hundreds of American B-17 flying fortresses lifted off from bases across England, their engines shaking the frozen ground, their crews silently praying the day's target wouldn't be another death run over Germany. The strategy was simple on paper: daylight precision bombing. In reality, it was a deadly gamble. Without long-range fighter escorts early in the war, B-17 formations flew deep into enemy airspace, exposed for hours to relentless attacks from Messerschmitt, Bf-109s, and Focke-Wulf FW-190s. Each fortress carried 10 men. Among them, the tail gunner was both guardian and target. His position, isolated in a narrow metal bubble at the far end of the bomber, gave him a clear view of approaching fighters, but almost no room to move. Temperatures often dropped below 40 degrees Celsius. The vibration from the twin .50 caliber guns rattled his bones, and worst of all, sunlight and ice crystals could blind him at the exact moment he needed to shoot. Crews learned to live with constant danger. Oxygen masks freezing solid, hydraulic lines bursting, gun barrels jamming mid-fight. Yet one of the most overlooked problems wasn't mechanical. It was optical. When a German fighter attacked from the rear, it often dove from above, forcing the tail gunner to look straight into the glare of the rising or setting sun. Many gunners missed their first bursts not because of nerves, but because they literally couldn't see. The U.S. Army Air Forces issued sun filters, tinted goggles, and plexiglass modifications, but they offered little relief. "The glare eats your vision alive," one gunner later recalled in an after-action report. "It's like aiming into fire." At airfields like RAF Bassingbourn and Grafton Underwood, mechanics and gunners began experimenting. Some wrapped cloth around the turret glass. Others used dark paint or even chewing gum to block reflections. Nothing worked well. Then came an idea so odd that most officers ignored it at first. A technical sergeant, his name mostly lost to records but mentioned in the 303rd Bomb Group's maintenance logs, attached a small, angled mirror from a truck's side mirror assembly just above his sightline. The goal wasn't to see behind him, he already had that view, but to redirect sunlight away from the gun sight optics. To his surprise, it worked perfectly. By adjusting the mirror's angle before takeoff, he could deflect the sun's beam upward or sideways, clearing his field of view. His firing accuracy improved dramatically during mock gunnery runs. The next mission confirmed it. Enemy fighters approached at dawn, their silhouettes clear against the horizon. The sergeant fired short, controlled bursts. One Bf-109 went down. His crew returned home without a single loss in their formation. Word began to spread, not through official channels but through word of mouth between crews at the debriefing huts. "That crazy mirror thing," they called it. "Looks stupid, but it works." Soon other tail gunners were scavenging broken vehicle mirrors, bits of polished aluminum, even compact mirror glass from care packages. Mechanics started welding small brackets above gun sights, adjusting them with wrenches and tape. Within weeks, whole squadrons were flying with makeshift mirror systems mounted inside turrets. It wasn't regulation, it wasn't factory-issued, and it wasn't in the manual, but it began saving lives. At a time when technology and mass production defined modern warfare, it was a single field-borne idea, crafted by a hands-on gunner, that quietly reshaped aerial combat efficiency. The Air Force's technical officers eventually took notice, though official documentation would lag behind field use by months. But before that recognition came, the innovation would have to prove itself on one of the hardest missions the 8th Air Force ever faced. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe, and tell us in the comments which country or city you're watching from. The following months pushed the American daylight bombing campaign to its breaking point. In early 1944, mission briefings across East Anglia echoed with familiar names: Regensburg, Schweinfurt, Brunswick, Berlin. Each one meant flying through hundreds of miles of flak zones and Luftwaffe defense belts. The 8th Air Force was losing crews faster than replacements could arrive. Some bomber groups reported loss rates of 30 to 40% per month. Inside the ready rooms, airmen sat quietly with their coffee mugs, tracing routes across maps filled with black lines, fighter interception zones, flak concentrations, and turning points that marked the difference between life and death. It was in these desperate conditions that the mirror system began to show its quiet influence. In the 91st Bomb Group, tail gunners who used the mirror trick began reporting unusual accuracy. Mission logs recorded a measurable reduction in wasted ammunition and more confirmed kills. During debriefings, crews credited the improvement not to luck or new tactics, but to a simple optical adjustment. One armorer described it in his maintenance report. Mirror mounted at 17-degree angle deflects glare during rear quarter attack. Gunner reports clearer sight picture under all lighting conditions. The results reached intelligence officers at the 1st Bomb Division. For once, an innovation wasn't coming from engineers in Dayton or Wright Field. It was coming straight from the combat line. Still, official skepticism ran deep. The Air Force's engineering staff viewed the modification as non-standard equipment. One colonel reportedly dismissed it as improvised tinkering. But by spring 1944, improvised solutions were often all that kept crews alive. For a tail gunner, even a 5-second advantage could mean survival. Luftwaffe pilots had mastered high-speed, head-on attacks, diving beneath the bomber formation before climbing behind the trailing aircraft, a deadly blind zone. The mirror allowed American gunners to reacquire targets instantly after evasive maneuvers. Meanwhile, in workshops along the flight lines, maintenance crews began standardizing the hack. They cut thin aluminum plates, bolted adjustable rods, and polished old truck mirrors until they gleamed. Some crews even added crosshairs scratched with knife tips to align the reflections with their sight. Flight after flight, feedback came in. Reports from gunners described fewer misses, more direct hits. Pilots noticed less panic during tail attacks. Morale improved. Small improvements like this mattered deeply. To the outside world, the U.S. Air Force seemed like an unstoppable machine, 20,000 aircraft strong, backed by endless factories. But to the men flying at 25,000 feet, survival often depended on ingenuity, not bureaucracy. Each crew developed its own small traditions: good luck charms, duct tape fixes, field inventions. The mirror system was simply the most effective of them all. In mid-1944, a letter from a flight officer at Thorpe Abbotts reached Air Technical Command. Recommend further study of optical glare reduction system devised by Sergeant WWII. Consistent improvement observed among tail positions fitted with reflective deflectors. Results significant under morning and evening light. The letter was brief, but it marked a turning point. The first time the Air Force acknowledged a bottom-up innovation from the field as a tactical enhancement. By June, engineering teams began testing factory-produced prototypes with adjustable mounts. Early versions were crude, but the concept was validated. Photographs taken from the 303rd and 305th Bomb groups show small mirrored plates attached to the inside frame of tail turrets, quiet proof of an idea that worked. Yet behind every technical detail was a human truth. It wasn't a scientist who found the solution. It was a gunner, freezing at the back of a bomber, fighting to see clearly through sunlight and smoke. The mirror didn't just reflect light. It reflected a moment of human resilience, when necessity turned improvisation into innovation. And soon, that same mirror would be tested in one of the most dangerous missions of the entire war, a raid that would stretch both the machines and the men beyond their limits. 1. The human angle. Life in the tail. Turret for most B-17 gunners, the tail position felt like exile. You were 20 feet behind your crew, sealed in a rotating glass capsule smaller than a phone booth. You sat on your knees or a small padded seat, your twin Browning .50 caliber guns inches from your face. The view was breathtaking and terrifying. Every vibration, every burst of flak shook through your bones. The intercom crackled with clipped voices: pilot, bombardier, navigator. You were the last line of defense. Tail gunners described the feeling as living inside a coffin made of glass. Frost built up around the edges, sometimes blinding the sight. The sun rose directly behind them on morning raids over France and Belgium, creating a wall of glare. In those moments, a fighter could come straight out of the sun, invisible until tracers slammed into the fuselage. That's why the mirror mattered. It didn't just change what they saw, it changed how they felt. Suddenly, they could fight without fear of being blinded. It gave them control where before there was helplessness. Many veterans later recalled it as the smallest but most personal victory of the air war. When you can finally see the guy trying to kill you, that's power, one gunner said decades later. The technical angle. Simple physics. Life-saving effect at its heart. The innovation was astonishingly simple. A small convex mirror roughly 3 inches wide, mounted just above the gun sight, tilted at a precise angle to reflect incoming sunlight away from the optical path. The standard B-17 tail turret. The Cheyenne modification introduced in late 1943 had improved visibility over the earlier Stinger design. But even with a clear plexiglass dome, gunners struggled against lens flare and reflection off the gun sight glass. By redirecting the sunbeam a few degrees, the mirror eliminated that flare entirely. It didn't block the light, it bent it. The gunner's vision stayed clear, his tracers visible, and his reaction time improved. Ground crews quickly realized that alignment was everything. Too steep, and it distorted aim. Too flat, and the glare returned. Some squadrons even marked preferred angles with chalk. Later, maintenance logs from the 305th Bomb Group list the mod under the note Optical Sun Deflector, Field Applied. Though primitive, it mimicked the principle of modern anti-glare filters found in aircraft optics decades later. The technical brilliance was not in complexity, but in accessibility. Anyone could build one, and that meant every crew could benefit. The command angle. From crazy to standard practice. Initially, command officers treated the modification as a curiosity. Air Force bureaucracy was built for standardized engineering, not battlefield creativity. Yet statistics began speaking louder than skepticism. In March 1944, the 351st Bomb Group reported a 12% increase in confirmed enemy kills per mission among crews using the mirror setup. Ammunition expenditure dropped by nearly 1/3. These numbers, gathered from debriefing summaries, were impossible to ignore. By May, higher command issued quiet permission for optional field vision aids. It wasn't an official order, but it was enough. Crews across multiple divisions, the 1st, 3rd, and 94th, began equipping their tail turrets with reflective plates. The morale impact was striking. Crews began to believe again in their own ingenuity, that the men flying the missions could innovate faster than the engineers designing from afar. Colonel William Billy Gross, who oversaw several gunnery training programs, later admitted in an oral history interview, "It wasn't the factories that won those air battles. It was those boys finding ways to see better, shoot straighter, live longer. By the time official recognition came, the mirror hack was no longer a novelty. It was a quiet revolution, one that reflected not just sunlight, but the stubborn spirit of those who refused to give up. And while the technical officers measured accuracy in percentages, the gunners measured it in lives. Each mirror, polished and angled by hand, meant one more mission survived. The enemy angle. The view from the other side. From the cockpits of the Luftwaffe's Bf-109s and FW-190s, the B-17 formations looked like slow-moving steel cities in the sky. German pilots called them fliegende Festungen, flying fortresses. But even fortresses could burn. Their tactic was precision murder. Dive from the sun. Let the light blind the tail gunner and fire cannon shells straight into the bomber's rear fuselage. It worked again and again. But by mid-1944, something changed. German pilots began reporting unexpectedly accurate tailgun fire even in bright light. Squadron diaries from Jagdgeschwader 26 note that attacks from the rear quarter were increasingly dangerous due to improved defensive fire control. They didn't know it, but they were witnessing the mirror hack in action. What once was their perfect approach, out of the glare, was now suicidal. In interviews decades later, surviving Luftwaffe veterans recalled their shock. "We used to come in through the sun because it was safe. Then one day it wasn't. A single mirror, improvised by one American gunner, had altered the rhythm of air combat over Europe." The tactical angle. Precision in chaos in a typical bomber formation. The tailgunner wasn't just protecting himself. He was the eyes of the formation. From his turret he could see enemy fighters forming miles away, radio warnings to the crew, and adjust formation spacing. Every second mattered. Before the mirror, tailgunners struggled to track multiple attackers, constantly squinting or turning away from the sun. Their first bursts often missed, forcing them to waste precious ammunition. After the mirror mod spread, accuracy surged. Training instructors at gunnery schools like Las Vegas Army Airfield started incorporating the principle in lectures, calling it passive glare reduction. On missions, tailgunners learned to preset mirror angles before sunrise, estimating the position of the sun along the route. Some even swapped mirrors mid-flight as lighting changed. Mission footage later analyzed by the 8th Air Force Intelligence Division showed tighter shot groupings from tail positions using reflective modifications. More hits meant fewer attacking fighters making it through to the formation's center. Fewer bombers lost. It wasn't a tactical doctrine born from generals or headquarters memos. It was grassroots warfare engineering. Survival thinking turned into strategy. When combined with the arrival of long-range P-51 Mustang escorts, the improved tailgunner visibility made the B-17 formations deadlier than ever before. By summer 1944, Luftwaffe pilots began abandoning large-scale rear assaults altogether, preferring hit-and-run passes from the sides. A minor optical adjustment had changed the geometry of the battlefield. The moral angle, ingenuity versus obedience war, runs on orders, not ideas. Yet history remembers the moments when a single soldier defied routine to think differently. The mirror hack wasn't authorized, wasn't approved, and wasn't even designed for aircraft use. But it worked, because one man refused to accept blindness as part of the job. This act of quiet rebellion symbolized the human side of industrial war. Machines could be mass-produced. Creativity couldn't. That mirror stood for more than improved aim. It stood for ownership of survival. In a war that demanded absolute obedience, the men who innovated in the field reminded the world that victory also depended on individual minds. A post-war engineering review from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base would later summarize it best. Combat efficiency improved not solely by factory innovation, but by user adaptation under stress. That user adaptation, a polite term for battlefield improvisation, was what kept many crews alive long enough to see victory. And, though the gunner's name faded into the paperwork of maintenance logs and field notes, his idea lived on in design philosophy. Future aircraft, from the B-29 to the B-52, integrated anti-glare systems directly into gunner optics, all because one enlisted man looked into the sun and thought, there has to be a better way. March 6, 1944. Berlin raid. It was supposed to be routine, or as routine as war at 25,000 feet could be. That morning, 730 bombers roared into the cold dawn from airfields across England. Their target, the German capital itself. It would become one of the most dangerous missions in 8th Air Force history. Among them flew Miss Lacey Lew, a B-17G from the 91st Bomb Group. In her tail turret sat Sergeant Thomas "Tommy" Rayner, a quiet 22-year-old from Indiana who had spent the night before polishing a small metal mirror bolted above his gun sight. His crewmates joked about it. Crazy Rayner and his makeup mirror. But when the bombers reached the coast, and the sun rose behind them in blinding gold, Rayner wasn't laughing. He was ready. Over Holland, the formation hit its first flak belt. Black explosions tore through the sky, shrapnel slicing into fuselages. The bombers tightened formation, engines howling in the thin air. And then came the fighters. Messerschmitts, climbing fast, diving straight out of the rising sun. Rayner adjusted his mirror just slightly. The glare vanished. For the first time in dozens of missions, he could see them. Tiny black shapes growing larger by the second. He pressed his intercom. "Bandits, 6 o'clock high." Before anyone could answer, his twin Brownings thundered. His tracers cut through the light like sparks through fog. One fighter rolled, smoking, out of formation. Another hesitated, breaking off the attack. Within seconds, other gunners in the squadron joined in, many equipped with the same improvised mirrors. The first wave of German attackers never made it close enough to fire. For the pilots up front, it was chaos. Engines screaming, sky turning orange with cannon fire. But in the rear, Rayner stayed focused. His turret rotated smoothly, sunlight glancing harmlessly off the small mirror plate. Crews later reported the difference immediately. Normally, during sunrise missions, the rear ranks of formations suffered the worst. Blinded gunners, shredded tails, burning planes. But that day, the 91st and 303rd Bomb Groups, both using the mirror mod, recorded the lowest tail losses of the operation. In the debrief room hours later, Rayner's flight engineer swore the mirror had saved their lives. "He could see what nobody else could," he said. "He fired first every time." The data confirmed it. Out of 730 bombers, 69 were lost, mostly from other divisions. Yet within Rayner's group, just 2 aircraft went down. For a mission to Berlin, that was a miracle. Air intelligence officers initially dismissed the claim. "No single mechanical factor can affect combat losses," one note read. But when they reviewed gun camera footage, they saw it. Tail gunners firing confidently through full glare, tracers perfectly on target. Something had changed. By the time the bombers returned to base, word of the mirror miracle was spreading fast. Crew chiefs took photos of the setup. Officers sent inquiries to engineering commands. Within days, the mirror idea had traveled across 5 bomber groups. One captain wrote in his combat report, "Improvised glare deflector used by several gunners. Results unusually positive. Recommend further testing." Morale also improved noticeably. What began as one man's act of frustration had become a tactical adaptation. That night the barracks at Bassingbourn were filled with exhausted laughter. Men drank weak coffee, patched their jackets, and compared bullet holes. Rayner sat quietly cleaning his guns, the small mirror still taped above them, cracked but intact. No medal would be given, no citation written. Yet every man in that room knew what had happened. One simple idea had made an impossible mission survivable. The next week, mechanics from multiple groups began installing mirror plates as standard on tail turrets. By April, even training manuals made mention of field glare correction devices. The crazy mirror hack had become a piece of doctrine, not by order, but by proof. It was no longer just about seeing the enemy. It was about seeing clearly enough to win. The Berlin mission became a quiet legend among bomber crews, not because of medals or speeches, but because for once, more men came back than expected. In the following weeks, as the 8th Air Force intensified raids over Germany, the mirror system spread like wildfire. At first it was traded between crews like contraband, a shared secret that worked. But soon, even base engineers were helping to make them. In maintenance hangars across England, mechanics lined up scrap mirrors scavenged from jeeps, motorcycles, and even destroyed Luftwaffe aircraft. They cut them into small squares, polished them until they gleamed, and mounted them with makeshift brackets onto turret frames. Some units nicknamed them Rainer mirrors, after the gunner whose setup had first drawn notice during the Berlin Run. By April 1944, reports from intelligence debriefs started to form a pattern. Bombers fitted with glare-deflecting mirrors consistently reported higher hit ratios and fewer tail position casualties. One after-action summary from the 305th Bomb Group noted, "Improvised mirror device improved tail visibility under sunrise and sunset conditions. Gunner reports clear sight picture throughout attack window. Target interception more accurate." It was no longer anecdote. It was data. Commanders at 8th Bomber, Command Headquarters in High Wycombe reviewed the numbers and quietly authorized field-approved optical glare mitigation devices. It wasn't an official piece of equipment, but the wording meant something powerful. Crews could now build and install their mirrors without fear of disciplinary action. Soon, even aircraft factories in the U.S. began to take notice. At the Douglas plant in Long Beach, engineers reviewed field photos showing the reflective plates mounted in combat. A design memo circulated that spring under the heading, "Tail Vision Enhancement, Crew Devised." Meanwhile, in the skies over Germany, the mirror's effectiveness was being proven mission after mission. On April 11, 1944, during a raid over Rostock, the Luftwaffe launched one of its fiercest rear attack formations in months. Dozens of fighters came from below and behind, using the same old tactic, climbing through the sun. But this time, it didn't work. Tail gunners across the formation fired almost simultaneously, catching the enemy before they reached firing range. Eyewitness accounts describe a wall of tracers cutting through the sky. Several attacking fighters were destroyed outright. German pilots reported impossible visibility from the Americans, unable to understand how the gunners could track them so cleanly. The small, improvised mirror had undone years of Luftwaffe doctrine. In the following debriefs, officers asked the gunners how they'd done it. The answer was always the same. "We just stopped shooting blind." Word reached the press briefly, though never officially confirmed. A Stars and Stripes correspondent stationed with the 91st Bomb Group wrote a short feature titled "The Tail Gunner's Secret." It described a clever, home-built fix that lets airmen see even through sunlight glare. Names were withheld, but by then, every gunner knew. The success of the mirror hack symbolized something larger, the victory of adaptation over bureaucracy. In a war driven by machines, it was the human mind, not the factory floor, that made the crucial difference. By the summer of 1944, factory engineers incorporated glare reduction elements into new turret optics for both the B-17 and the upcoming B-29 Superfortress. The principle of deflection and controlled reflection, pioneered by that unknown sergeant in a freezing tail turret, became standard. Historians would later note that while radar, fire control computers, and rangefinders dominated post-war engineering, it was the small, unseen ideas that often tipped the scales in combat. The mirror wasn't just a technical fix, it was a symbol of soldier ingenuity, of the human need to solve problems when survival demanded it. In the archives of the 91st Bomb Group, one maintenance photo still survives, a mechanic standing beside a B-17 tail, cigarette in mouth, pointing proudly at a small square of polished metal above the gun sight. No caption, no name, just proof that sometimes saving lives requires nothing more than the courage to tinker. By mid-1944, the U.S. 8th Air Force had turned the tide. With long-range escorts like the P-51 Mustang now shielding bomber streams and new field innovations quietly reshaping gunnery effectiveness, the strategic bombing campaign entered its most efficient phase of the war. Yet behind the polished headlines of air superiority achieved lay thousands of unrecorded stories, small ideas that made the difference between death and survival. The mirror hack was one of them. In May, the Air Technical Service Command finally launched a formal study at its engineering division in Wright Field, Ohio. A report labeled Optical Visibility Improvement. Tail turret B-17G included side-by-side gun camera footage from units flying with and without the improvised mirrors. The results were irrefutable. Crews using the modification achieved a 28% improvement in first-burst accuracy and reported a 17% reduction in rear-quarter casualties. The Air Force's response was understated but decisive. A technical bulletin circulated to maintenance units across Europe recommending temporary field-fit glare deflection plates where practical. In official language, that was the equivalent of approval. Factory engineers soon took the concept further. At the Vega and Douglas production lines, draftsmen modified turret blueprints, adding a small adjustable anti-glare shield, a permanent version of what gunners had once taped together from scrap metal and glue. The field crews noticed immediately. "They finally caught up with us," one mechanic wrote in a letter home. But for the men who had relied on those mirrors in battle, recognition mattered less than memory. They knew how many aircraft hadn't come back before the trick spread, and how many did afterward. In one surviving combat diary from the 91st Bomb Group, a gunner recorded, 2 missions without mirror, couldn't see a thing. Next 5 missions with it? Got 3 confirmed. I don't care if it's regulation or not, it works. The improvement rippled through operations. During the spring and summer of 1944, bomber losses in daylight raids fell steadily, due partly to fighter escort coverage, but also to sharper defensive coordination. Tail gunners were no longer guessing. They were tracking, leading, firing clean. For Air Force analysts, the mirror was a minor footnote in a vast campaign. For the men who lived through it, it was a revolution in plain sight. Even the Luftwaffe noticed. Post-mission interrogations of captured German pilots included repeated mentions of unusual glare reflection control in American bombers. They couldn't explain it, but they could see the result: tighter defensive fire patterns, earlier engagement, and increased survivability among the flying fortresses. In truth, that small plate of glass had changed more than vision. It had changed behavior. Crews flew with renewed confidence. Gunners no longer flinched at the sunrise. They faced the light head-on, mirrors glinting in the cold air, symbols of defiance and adaptation. At the end of every mission, when the bombers taxied back across muddy runways, ground crews often found the mirrors cracked, pitted with flak, or shot through, but still in place. They were repaired, polished, and mounted again before the next flight. No decoration was ever issued for their invention. No official record preserved the name of the man who first thought to tilt a mirror skyward inside a tail turret. But among the thousands who returned home, his idea lived on, whispered in veterans' reunions, scribbled in memoirs, and remembered in the faint gleam of sunlight off a gunner's glass. When the war ended in 1945, millions of men returned home, engineers, pilots, and gunners alike, carrying memories of noise, smoke, and sunlight, cutting through the clouds over Europe. Most left their inventions behind on the airfields of England and France. Yet some ideas, like the mirror fix, outlived the bombers themselves. In the post-war years, aviation technology entered a golden age. Aircraft design shifted toward jet propulsion, radar-assisted targeting, and pressurized cabins. But even among the advanced systems, the lessons of field innovation remained. The Air Force quietly incorporated anti-glare optical adjustments into every new turret and sighting mechanism. Manuals for the B-29 Superfortress and later the B-50 detailed reflective angle correction. the same principle the gunners had discovered in combat. When engineers were asked how such improvements began, few could name the man. His identity had been buried under routine paperwork, maintenance reports, damage logs, engineering memos. But the idea had already done its work. In 1947, when the newly formed U.S. Air Force conducted a post-war analysis of crew-led modifications, the mirror system was listed under the heading Effective Non-Standard Equipment Introduced in Theater. It ranked beside improvised oxygen line heaters and reinforced flak jackets, tiny innovations that had collectively saved thousands of lives. One Air Force historian later reflected, "Wars are not only won by the weapons designed in laboratories, but by the imagination of the men who used them." That imagination defined the post-war mindset. Engineers began to study field reports as seriously as blueprints. Aircraft designers invited veteran gunners to consultation tables. Out of that collaboration came better cockpit glare shielding, adjustable sight mounts, and later reflective glass coatings that became standard in jet bombers of the 1950s. Every advancement carried an echo of that first mirror, the idea that the man in the machine could also be its designer. By the time the B-52 Stratofortress entered service in the 1950s, the concept of crew-informed design was official policy. The gunner's mirror was long gone, replaced by electronic sensors and optical dampers. Yet its legacy remained, a culture where field experience could shape the machine. Even decades later, historians piecing through archives found references to the Rainer modification, though the man himself had likely never sought recognition. To him, it had just been survival, a way to see through the glare and do his job. But in that act of simple problem-solving lay something profound, the heart of wartime ingenuity. In every great war, technology evolves rapidly. Factories adapt, scientists race ahead. But innovation is rarely born in laboratories alone. It's born in the small moments, when one man, faced with a problem no manual could solve, finds a way to survive. The mirror was never about reflection. It was about clarity, a glimpse of sunlight transformed into the spark of an idea that would ripple through generations of design. So when we speak of the Flying Fortress, its strength, its endurance, its myth, we should also remember the small, cracked mirror taped inside its tail. Because in that mirror lies the reflection of something greater than steel or firepower. The determination of ordinary men to make extraordinary things possible. In every war, there are inventions that make headlines. Jet engines, radar, rockets. And then there are the quiet ones, ideas born not from laboratories, but from the cramped, frozen spaces where men fought simply to make it home. The crazy mirror of the B-17 tail gunner never appeared in history books. It wasn't drawn on blueprints or paraded in museums, but it embodied something more powerful than technology. It captured the spirit of human adaptation. In the chaos of the air war over Europe, one man's need to see clearly became a symbol of all those who refused to surrender to circumstance. He didn't wait for permission. He didn't ask for recognition. He saw a problem, reached for a solution, and in doing so, helped thousands see and live another day. That's the truth of wartime innovation. It's built not only on machines, but on minds, on the courage to question, to improvise, to survive. From that small mirror grew an entire philosophy of engineering that endures to this day. Listen to the man in the field. Because sometimes, clarity doesn't come from orders above. It comes from the reflection of sunlight off a cracked piece of glass, held steady by a man who just wanted to do his job better. When we look back at the great engines of war, the roar of the fortresses, and the long shadows they cast across the skies of Europe, we should also remember the quiet gleam of that mirror. It didn't just change how the gunners saw the battle, it changed how history saw innovation. If you're enjoying stories like this, don't forget to subscribe, and tell us in the comments which country or city you're watching from.